Like if you want to ensure that your team members understand deeply and exactly what you're asking them for, they need to be inspired and to feel safe enough to be able to ask questions in every situation. So we're going to create a culture where there is no foolish question. In fact, every one of you has to ask a question before we go.
I love that.
It's so simple. It takes it takes very little amount of time, but just that one practice, just shifting the mindset of the importance of asking questions and empowering everybody to ask questions. We've now created a moment. We've created 3 to 5 minutes at the end of every meeting where the amount of clarity that comes out of these simply profound questions empowers the team to be more efficient in executing what the expectations of leadership are.
And today's show, I'm delighted to introduce you to the wonderful Ben Utecht. Ben is a man who has won at the highest level on the field and in business. Ben is a Super Bowl champion with the Indianapolis Colts, a tight end who played under the legendary NFL Hall of Fame coach Tony Dungy. After a career-ending concussion forced him off the field, Ben didn't step back, he actually stepped up. He has since become one of the world's leading voices on organizational culture and leadership, serving as Chief Culture Officer for True North Private Equity, overseeing culture across a portfolio of 28 companies. He is the recipient of the prestigious Tony Dungy Uncommon Leader Award, a global keynote speaker who has worked with Fortune 500 companies, and the author of his powerful new book, The Champion's Creed, Transform Your Culture Through the Power of Belief, with a foreword by Tony Dungy himself. As ever, I invite you to go and grab a cup of coffee, a notepad and pen, and enjoy the show. Ben, you are very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Absolutely delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Brendan. So excited to be with you. Happy
Yeah,
St. Patrick's Day, man.
thank you so much, my friend. Hopefully, we'll get an opportunity to celebrate St. Patrick's Day at some stage together. So I know you're fond of this part of the world, but we'll make it happen. We'll work it
I
out.
can't wait. I can't wait.
Let's do that. Well, look, we're very aligned. Given the conversations that we've had, and indeed what I've picked up from your wonderful work and your wonderful book, our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Ben, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
Oh man, what a great question. Well, I think the word scaling is an important word to understand deeply, because you're talking about the replication of, it could be a system, it could be a strategy, but it's the replication of something over and over to have the greatest impact, not only on the organization, but on every single person who comes in contact with that brand, right? So scaling is not a word that we should just cast aside as, oh, that's just another business word that we hear every once in a while. Scaling um, is impact, right? Scaling is the ability to take an idea and to spread it across a community, and it becomes a movement, right? So scaling is really a movement, and a movement is essential when talking about organizational culture because it's defined as a single or community belief turned into action. And that is ultimately what we have to do with cultures. We have to inspire people to believe. Once you've inspired a person to believe, they'll give you all of their devotion, all of their commitment, and that's when you begin to have a transformational impact across a large group of people, right? And so scaling with purpose for me is really about transformational impact, that not only is going to improve an organization's success, but most importantly, it's going to transform every person that comes in contact with that organization.
I absolutely love that. I have goosebumps. So we've done more than 200 episodes, and that's the first time I've had goosebumps on the response to that question. So thank you for that. That's very,
Yeah.
very thoughtful, and resonates strongly. You are a remarkable guy. I've only recently had the fortune of coming to know you and your work, and the kind of something about the character of the person that I have in front of me. And for those who aren't familiar with Ben Utecht, how do you go from being a Super Bowl champion to now being a global authority in all things culture, being sought after by companies to come in and support them in architecting their culture? Can you give us the kind of the abridged version
No.
of the Ben Utecht story?
It's still it's still a mystery. I often joke about that from the stage that, you know, um, it's a mystery how I went from one career where my job was to hit people for a living to a second career, my job is to care about people for a living. Um, Honestly, Brendan, it started with my dad. I grew up in a family. My dad has been a pastor for over 40 years, and so, the idea of human purpose and significance and identity was something that was just a part of my family culture, and learning how to communicate. Aristotle said how important it was to know thyself, and that was something that was really a part of my family growing up. And so, I got to watch a man use words to positively transform people every single week. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. I knew I needed to use my voice to have a positive impact on people. I just didn't know what that was going to look like until I was blessed to find my way to the Indianapolis Colts, who won a Super Bowl, and they did it with a Hall of Fame head coach, Tony Dungy. And Tony Dungy was really the catalyst to what I'm speaking about now, what I'm doing now. He was the first to teach me that culture doesn't have to be subjective, that culture can be an objective tool that you can use to positively transform not only the organization but the people inside. And his belief was that if you build better men, you get better football players. That it's not only about teaching the fundamentals and techniques that help athletes be successful on the field or on the pitch, but it's about also teaching them how to become the best versions of themselves possible. And he had a system to practice that, right? So not only was he teaching us how to become better football players, but he was also um, giving us simply profound practices to help us become better men, right? So if we're gonna claim that integrity is a part of our culture, which means to be honest and to do the right thing, then I better develop my men to have more integrity, right? And so that was this profound journey that I went on, and really fell in love with this powerful um, people first mentality. And so when I retired from the NFL, um, my my question was, well, what's my story? What's going to be the story that I tell? And that experience of winning, the biggest game in American football, and to do it, through this servant leadership culture that Tony Dungy created, was the answer. And that's where I started, really kind of building my business around that, and have done that for the last 15 years. So pretty awesome.
It is indeed, and it's clear throughout your book the reverence in which you hold Coach Dungy with, and we'll get into that um, later on in the show. I'm keen to kind of understand and unpack the characteristics, the
Yeah.
man who is Tony Dungy, because clearly this individual has been the catalyst, as used to use the term that you have used to change your life,
Yeah.
and has allowed you or empowered you to change the lives of so many others. Congratulations, Ben. First and foremost, I absolutely love your book. For those who are listening, you won't be able to see me hold up The Champion's Creed: Transform Your Culture Through the Power of Belief. with, of course, a preface by Tony Dungy himself. So I encourage you all to go out and grab a copy of this book. It's just not another book on culture. It's so practical, but it's just imbued with your wonderful story, and it's clear you have a wonderful ability to tell stories and to share stories in a transformational way. You start off with a story. It's this vision, this moment when you're running out onto the field in 2007. It's the Super Bowl final. I can't imagine what's going on around you, or what's going on in your head, what you've just left in terms of the locker room. And you have this interaction with your dad, Jeff, who has come down to the tunnel in the hope of seeing you and sharing with you kind of to literally cheer you on, and you run on, and then you hear him and you turn back. Can you share that moment with us,
Yeah.
and how that went on to be really the anchor of everything else that you coach upon?
Yeah, man. What a powerful moment in time. And I remember, being behind the referee in the tunnel, and he had his hands up and he was holding back all the players. You can just imagine this herd of Indianapolis Colt athletes that were ready to charge the field, and he dropped his hands and he released the Colts, and we came flying out of the tunnel, and my foot landed on that freshly cut Bermuda grass field, and I heard this familiar voice behind me shouting my name, Ben, Ben. And as you described, I turned, and there was my dad. I mean, he had fought his way, Brendan, halfway around this stadium of 80,000 people to be in this perfect position. And I kind of describe it as he was in this crazy downward dog yoga position, like reaching over the railing, his leg was behind him and in the air. And he's just, he's just, you can just see the excitement and the joy in his face as he's reaching down for me. And uh, would you believe it? But I put my hand up and I kind of shooed my dad away. I was kind of like, Dad, this is the Super Bowl. Like, I got to go to work. Like, this is not the time. And Brendan, I don't know how to explain it. I took one more step onto the field, and it was like the fist of God just sucker punched me, and I stopped in my tracks. And I felt this inner voice saying, Ben, go back to your father. Go back to where this all began. And it was this epic moment in my life because in that moment, I realized how easily distracted I can be by the things that the world is offering me, and how that distraction can take me away from the things that matter most and the people that matter most, right? Like I got caught up in the notoriety and the vanity and the size of the moment, and I forgot about the thing that mattered most. I forgot about the man that mattered most. And I'm so glad I listened to that inner voice, because I turned and I sprinted back to the tunnel. My dad had already started to walk up the stairs, and I shouted out, Dad, Dad. And he heard my voice, and he came back to that position, and it was like a movie. It really was like a movie. Time slowed down. He reached down, I reached up, grabbed his hand, and we just lost it. I mean, just just started crying. I looked at my dad and I said, "Man, Dad, I love you, and I'm so thankful for you. It all started with you." And it did. It started with my dad in the backyard of a small Minnesota town where, he would get on his knees and he'd let this 4-year-old kid run into him with all of his might, and he'd pretend to, get blown up and fall back down, and he planted the seed for the love and the passion that I had for sports, and for that game. Um, And then he taught me guiding principles, his own creed that really challenged me and developed me to be, the best man that I can possibly be. But it's those moments, we face those moments every single day of our lives. We're confronted with similar situations every single day. And so it was just a powerful reminder of what matters most and understanding why we do what we do is so important. Um, when it comes to seizing the purpose that we have, you know?
It's a beautiful metaphor, actually, for large companies. I always say it to those within our community, those within our ScaleX Accelerator program, that every company, every large company who they revere and want to become like, started as a small company. They started in the metaphorical equivalent of the backyard,
Yeah, right.
with an idea, and role playing that idea that
Right.
ultimately leads to the ultimate prize, the Super Bowl. But
Yep.
it all starts with someone deciding that this is what they're going to do.
Mhm.
No one on that field that night has skipped any steps. And
Yeah.
similarly, so with actually creating a large company, a company that is truly scaling with purpose, it starts with that seed. You have a beautiful acronym uh, built out of the word family. Tell me
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the great things about sports is it's just full of acronyms, right? I mean, there's an acronym for everything in sports. But, I'll never forget the first team meeting that I had in the NFL. And Tony Dungy walks into the team meeting room. And the very first thing that he said to this team of 53 of the greatest athletes in the world. He said, "Men, if you're sitting in this room and your entire identity is wrapped up in a sport, you've completely missed the purpose of your life." And it was like, whoa, like all the oxygen just got sucked out of the room. If you're sitting in this room and your entire identity is as a football player, you've totally missed the purpose of your life. And I was like, holy cow, like I've never heard a head coach started a team meeting like that. And he continued by saying, "Look, my job here in Indianapolis is to win. We're professional athletes. We have to win. That's going to be our goal. But more importantly, our job is to build a family. And the acronym for family in football is forget about me, I love you." And I'm just sitting there going, wait a second, what? Like, Brandon, like this is like the top 1% of players in American football make it to the NFL. It's 53 of the most diverse, egotistical, powerful, confident men on the planet, right? And the way we're going to win is through selflessness, right? The way we're going to win is through humility, right? But that's what he believed. If I can get 53 of the most diverse, powerful men on the planet to come together, believing and trusting and hoping in each other, then I've built the strongest team possible that nobody can dismantle. Right. So that's where that powerful idea of family comes in into business is, oftentimes family is where you have the most conflict, but it's because it's with the people that you trust the most. Right. And because of that, the amount of clarity and transparency and impact has so much more significance. And so this idea of building a family was really powerful. And to do it through the power of selflessness, through the principle of selflessness and love and value and respect. And it worked. I mean, we were the smallest team in the NFL that year. So it wasn't size, power, speed that ultimately gave us the edge. The edge was that we had built the strongest team in the NFL that year that nobody could dismantle.
So let's get into this because this is fascinating as you described. Like you're what 6'7", 250 pounds. Like this raging giant of a man whose entire life has been architected for this moment, and he's saying, guys, no, this is about love and humility and respect. Uh,
Hmm.
you let's start to understand then how we kind of implant this sense of family where we're saying forget about me, I love you, it's we before me in the context of actually creating something bigger. I used to say to our own team in previous business, individuals score goals, teams win matches, clubs win championships. We want to create a club. How do we do that? Back to your point, we objectively architect a culture that, regardless of whether others seek to copy our products, they cannot replicate or copy our culture. So
Hmm.
I mean, you talk about this and why it resonates so strongly. Culture by design. You say something in the book that really stood out to me. You will always have a culture by design or default. So why not design it? So
Hmm.
for SMB leaders listening to this today, and they're caught up in so many challenges of actually growing and scaling a business, where do they begin when
Hmm.
they're listening to this to begin to architect
Yeah.
a culture that ultimately leads to high performance?
Yeah. What a great question. I have a huge passion for the SMB leader and company. I was blessed about 5 years ago to be invited into the C-suite of a private equity company in Minnesota that focuses on small and mid-cap companies as their chief culture officer. So this was a huge step in my career, Brendan, to go from just being an inspirationalist of culture to an operationalist of culture. And so I've got a lot of experience in the SMB market when it comes to culture development. And you will always have a culture by design or default. Actually comes out of academia. I thought it was really powerful as I began studying some of the PhD curriculums of mentors that I have in the culture space. And I found Dr. Edgar Sheen, who's known as the godfather of culture. This man is he's no longer with us, but was just an exceptional leader, world renowned, brought into countries to actually do culture audits on the country. Um, and what he taught was that every culture in the world comes out of the espoused beliefs, assumptions, and artifacts of the community, right? In other words, what do you believe? Why do you believe it? And how do you believe it should be practiced or behaved? And and so the very first place that I started helping our small and mid-sized companies is on how they actually define their culture. Right? This is one of the I think foundational issues that companies have with culture is everybody talks about it, right? But it feels like a boulder. Like culture feels like this massive boulder, and we've got to figure it out, throw it into a pond, and make a big splash. But culture is not a boulder game. Culture is a pebble game, and it's about the tossing of individual pebbles into the pond over and over, creating ripple effect after ripple effect after ripple effect. And so the first place that companies really need to start is they need to ask themselves, have we deeply and clearly defined what we believe about our core values, why we believe our core values matter in the workplace, and how do we actually create systems to practice our core beliefs and values to grow and scale our company? Because you already know this, every company in the world goes through the same process of what? Mission, vision, and values. They sit around a board table, they talk about what they believe in, why they believe it, and then they create the artifacts of those beliefs, which are choosing value principles that reflect those beliefs. And then they put those value principles on an about page on a website, and they say, good, we've done it. We've just built our culture. Our values are on the website, and we've got an inspirational statement. And now they just hope and pray that that's what all of their team members reflect and embody. And that's where the first change has to come into place, right? So the very first thing that I did at True North Private Equity for small and mid-sized companies was I developed a product called the Culture Creed, which is where the book The Champion's Creed really comes from. And so as a company, we had 8 core values. And I thought to myself, man, we're missing so much meat on the bone to actually turn our culture into a product that we can scale across the organization. So I took all of our senior leaders through a belief survey for each of the 8 core value principles and developed a 32-page culture onboarding and educational training manual. Right? So it's no longer 8 core values on a website. We now actually have a culture manifesto. It is a training manual that we use in the hiring process, the interview process, and the onboarding process of every single employee that comes into the company. Right? And so now we've materialized our culture in a way that most companies don't understand how to do. And we've built a foundation of culture on the rock versus a foundation of sand. And that's where I really start, Brendan, in helping people understand that you're always going to have a culture by design or default. Why? Because culture comes out of the espoused beliefs, assumptions, and artifacts of the community. So every person brings their beliefs to work every day, and those beliefs drive their behavioral choices. So you're always going to have a culture. So why not design it? Why not actually articulate and understand and apply those beliefs into a culture strategy and system that you can practice in order to develop those beliefs and values in yourself and in others?
So powerful. It reminds me of a quote from a previous guest who's, again, like yourself, speaks authoritatively on all things culture, that too many companies laminate their values but don't live them. Just to that situation that you've described, they get around a boardroom table, say, here's our vision, here's our mission, here's our values. Let's laminate them, put them on the reception wall, get them
Yeah.
onto the about section of our website, and that's culture done. We know what it is, and
Was
typically
that
when
was that Dr. Tony Bridwell?
it wasn't
No, not
Dr.
yet.
Tony, it was
Okay.
Alan. Oh my goodness, Alan's name has escaped me.
Yeah.
His surname. No, it was a guy who's wrote a wonderful book also, the 31 Practices, and yes, the we all can kind of intellectualize what culture is, and you know, in good times we'll say, oh yes, we've got a wonderful culture, but I feel it's really in the most difficult times that that culture is tested. Before I get into kind of understanding that a little bit more, let's examine practically what we do here to actually start to implement the
Mhm.
culture by design as opposed to just letting culture happen organically. So you've talked about beliefs, you've talked about values, you've talked about behaviors. What's the interdependence of our beliefs the same as values? How do values translate into behaviors? How do we actually then reinforce the behaviors that we want to see in line with those values? Can you speak to that, Ben? Where do we start here? Is that are beliefs the same as values, or are those nuanced? How do we understand the individual beliefs and then actually get those to align collectively behind the company beliefs and value system?
Yeah. In my experience, it's a great question. It's a great question. Um, and you may find, you may find opposing views on that. I can speak clearly about what I believe based on my experience as a professional athlete and the time that I've spent working with companies. That usually what happens as companies are really starting out and trying to establish, what their core value principles are going to be, is that they first begin talking about the natural beliefs and assumptions that they have about the things that matter most. And that's where the conversation begins. The conversation always begins around, okay, do we want to be a company that that's honest? Do we want to be a company that believes in doing the right thing? What's the artifact of that? What's the symbol of that? Oh, that would be integrity, right? So the selection of integrity as a value principle comes out of what they believe about their company. We want to be an honest company that does the right thing. So then they choose the value principle of integrity to be the reflection or the symbol of that, right? Man, we really believe that, how we use words in our company is incredibly important. So then they choose the value principle of communication to be reflective or to symbolize that. And so for me, belief is the foundation that we even subconsciously start with. And out of the conversation around what we believe is usually where we begin to recognize the symbols that are going to best represent what those beliefs are. And that's why I think Dr. Sheen described culture as the espoused beliefs, assumptions, and artifacts of the community, because belief really is the foundation that drives you towards selecting the symbols of those beliefs that can be profound pillars that guide you towards, establishing and building and scaling a culture. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I really think that this is what's so unique about my approach in the book is, transform your culture through the foundation of belief is actually using the truths that come out of academia to drive you towards selecting the artifacts, the representations of those beliefs so that you can establish culture with clarity, right? And competency to be successful in scaling it across the organization.
So we define what we truly believe in the context of what is important to us, what we value, how we want to be perceived in the world, how we want to act in the world. Going back to the kind of the plus 30-page manifesto, the culture creed that you've created for those portfolio companies.
Mhm.
How do you implement that? So somebody's handed a 30-page manifesto and along with lots of other stuff
Yeah,
when they're
yeah,
onboarded and they kind of read through it, go, yeah, well, okay, well, that's all very nice. And so now the rubber hits the road and you, we, we brought somebody in, we will have applied uh, criteria to ensure that we're hiring for culture as well. I want to get to that.
yeah,
But how do we ensure? Well, let's start from there. How do we hire for
yeah.
culture? And then once they're handed the kind of 30-page manifesto, how do we ensure that, like, at the end of month one, month three, month 12, that actually this person's behavior is congruent with actually what we value, what we
Value, yeah.
believe in?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because it's uh, everything is smoke in the wind if you don't actually do it, right? Action is the key to this whole thing. That's why I always say, Simon Sinek gave us the power of why, right? Simon Sinek brought to us the importance of why, because understanding the why removes uncertainty and it brings clarity to the reason why we do. But the secret sauce, Brendan, is how. You can understand the why, but if you don't actually go and practice the why, if you don't actually go and do, then none of it matters, right? Business is about ultimately how we take the what and the why and apply it you know, to how we do it. And so when it comes to the culture, and this is one of the things I love. This is what I do a lot in companies. I just finished one for a large mortgage company in New York City, and so what we end up creating is a powerful, inspirational, and educational foundation of the culture of an organization. Okay. And then that also comes with interview questions to support the company as they're hiring, because often interviewing is hard. And
Yes.
oftentimes the people interviewing um, have not been prepared to ask the right questions, right? And that's the key is asking the right questions. And then the onboarding phase goes into the application of curriculum, where each value principle and its belief system now has a curriculum that can hold team members accountable through the learning process, right? Three multiple choice questions and an essay, right? Just inspiring them to take the learning process about the culture seriously. So when the creed is complete, now it becomes part of the system. So in the pre-screening phase, when you select an individual to be interviewed for the role, you automatically send them the culture creed. And you're saying, hey, we want you to study our culture because it's going to be a part of the interview process. Then once they're in the interview process, you've supported the interviewer by giving them questions that they can ask specifically about the culture and the value principles, right? And that is going to give them a stronger foundation of wisdom to make a selection towards somebody that has culture alignment with the belief system of the organization. Okay. Once you've made this selection of the individual, now you have an onboarding experience that they can go through. So once the person's been selected, then they go back through your culture onboarding and educational training manual. But now they have to answer simply profound questions that are connected to those foundational beliefs and values. So by the time they actually start their role, they've had 100 times the depth and clarity and education of the culture of the company. It's not just they're not just being onboarded into their skills and competencies for the role. That's incredibly important. But now in parallel with that, they're now empowered to really dive deep into the culture of the organization. And so when they start their job, they've now experienced um, a culture process that they've not had, in most other companies. So that's just an example of how you can take something like that and then you can apply it, in a system that can be practiced. Now, how you scale from there really comes down to, how are you set up to develop your leaders in your organization, right? Because the culture creed can become a development platform as well for managers, because now you have a platform that managers can use in the development of their current team members to develop them towards the core beliefs and values of the company, right? And so that's where you then begin to have a scaling impact within the organization, is through leadership development, strategy, and system, to actually pour into your people and actually practice the culture.
Practicing the culture, what does that look like Ben, on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, 6 monthly, annual basis, in terms of actually building a rhythm, a cultural rhythm in the
Yeah.
organization where we're having, you know, uh, regular conversations, regular check-ins, calling
Yeah.
people out where they're doing things that are aligned to our values. They're behaving in accordance with that. What does all of that look like in practice?
Yeah.
For me, this is way beyond kind of an annual review where uh, you
I
know 1 hour into the conversation, now you're having a conversation around kind of behaviors. This seems to me like an ongoing embedment of practices and behaviors in an organization that
yeah.
you're constantly keeping everyone aligned to the actual
Yeah.
creed. So
Yeah.
what does this look like in practice?
Well, that's the word. That's the key word. And it's one of the chapters in the book. If you remember, practice,
Yeah.
practice, practice. And, let me start with some powerful NFL sports data. So for every 280 hours an NFL football player practices, they perform for 1 hour. Think about that ratio. It's got to be the same in it's got to be the same in Premier Soccer. It's got to be, right? For every 280 hours an NFL player practices, they perform for 1 hour. Let's break that down into a game. Every game has between 65 and 75 offensive plays. Each play lasts on average 5.5 to 6 seconds. So if you're a starter and you never leave the field, the most amount of time that you'll actually perform on the field is between 9 and 11 minutes.
That's incredible.
Isn't it crazy? So you're watching a 3 hour NFL production, but if you're a starter and you never leave the field, the only amount of time you're actually performing between the whistles is between 9 and 11 minutes.
That's incredible.
Even though we practice 16 hours on the field every single week to perform 9 to 11 minutes. But that's why we love sports. That's why we love watching these incredible athletes because we're actually watching careers built on the foundation of practice, right? We love watching the Olympics because of careers built on the foundation of practice. And those careers result in the greatest athletic spectacles that we can watch. I thought it was really interesting when I then asked Gallup um, to find data on how much time does an employee get for human development in the marketplace. And the ratio was for every 40 hours an employee works, they're lucky to get between 30 and 60 minutes of human development practice.
Yeah.
So there is where the problem is, right? Because business is transactional, because business is always transact and it has to be, right? We have to embrace that. It has to be transactional. But transactional is always going to compete with relational. And we have to, if we're going to take culture seriously, we have to understand that culture is focusing on every company's greatest asset, which is their people. And we have to be able to make adjustments and improvements on the amount of time we're practicing the human development of our people, period. Now, are we ever going to be able to replicate the NFL ratio? No. And we shouldn't, right? But imagine if you took 30 to 60 minutes for every 40 hours, and imagine if that became 90 to 120 minutes. And those 90 to 120 minutes were intentionally designed towards the development of our people to reflect the culture of the organization. What kind of, remember the pebbles? If one of your pebbles is, hey, we're going to start practicing leadership development towards our culture, and we're just going to add another 30 minutes to that, you know, the waterfall or the ripple effect that you could have. And that's what I did at True North. So right away at True North, I built a leadership development program for all of our portfolio managers. And those leadership development meetings, I met with them every other week. I would meet with each manager and we would have a leadership development session for 60 minutes. And it was completely focused not on the transactional side of their business. It was completely focused on how are you living out and practicing the core beliefs and values of the organization? How can I help you win better when it comes to integrity or execution or courage or empathy, and giving them simply profound practices that they could bring back to their businesses and lead better from the front. And and that's really where we begin to create the ripple effect is by developing our leaders towards the culture so that they can develop their people towards the culture.
Yeah, I love the ripple effect. It's a metaphor that we would use in the context of scaling with purpose. It starts with somebody dropping that first pebble in, and when you get lots of leaders who are scaling with purpose, eventually all of those ripples will align and join up. You create this huge wave.
Yeah.
So it's not a boulder game, it's a pebble game in terms of the practice. Can you give our listeners an example of one practice you would encourage those leaders within True North to go away to perform, to practice, during the next week?
Yeah,
What does a practice typically look like when they're
sure.
intentional around their behavior in accordance with their values and beliefs?
Yeah. So here's a great example. And you know, I like to use the phrase simply profound, because oftentimes if we're looking at culture through a bolder lens, we really struggle to know where to start, right? But when we look at it as a pebble game, when we realize that culture is really about the simply profound practices that we can create, that we don't need to overthink. So here's an example of how we practiced communication at True North. So we were discovering, especially in private equity, that business transactions move fast. Like financial services in general, right, is always moving really fast. And so oftentimes, um, what gets lost in translation or what gets lost in communication is the details, right? And so you find, frustration when managers are trying to communicate expectations with team members or employees, but not all of the team members and employees understand it correctly, and then they don't go apply it correctly. Okay. So what is a simply profound way that we can ensure more clarity with our teams? And I took something that Tony Dungy taught me when I was playing in Indianapolis, that the foundation of clarity is asking great questions. And Tony Dungy always taught us that there are no stupid or foolish questions. And so in order to ensure the highest degree of clarity, he created a system of practicing asking great questions. So when we would break into our individual meeting rooms by position, Brendan, so tight ends would go into their meeting room, wide receivers, quarterbacks, the mandate or the rule to practice that belief about the importance of asking questions was every person in the room had to ask a question before the meeting ends. And so what did he do? He removed all insecurity because now every single tight end has to ask a question before we leave. And not only do we have to ask one, but we have to prepare at least three, because what if one of the other tight ends asks a question that I was going to ask? Well, I better have another question ready. And so what that created was a simply profound practice that ensured a higher degree of understanding and clarity. And so we would bring that practice into the True North system as well. Like when if you want to ensure that your team members understand deeply and exactly what you're asking them for, they need to be inspired and to feel safe enough to be able to ask questions in every situation. So we're going to create a culture where there is no foolish question. In fact, every one of you has to ask a question before we go.
I love that.
It's so simple. It takes it takes very little amount of time, but just that one practice, just shifting the mindset of the importance of asking questions and empowering everybody to ask questions. We've now created a moment. We've created 3 to 5 minutes at the end of every meeting where the amount of clarity that comes out of these simply profound questions empowers the team to be more efficient in executing what the expectations of leadership are. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And we had the wonderful Amy Edmondson on, who has authored many books on the subject of psychological safety and
Yeah,
creating an environment that allows people to and empowers people to ask simply profound questions. So there's a lovely linkage there to a number of the guests we've had on this season. I want to come back to Coach Dungy. You hold this man in such high reverence. It's beautiful to read it and to listen to you speak about the impact this man has had on you. What made him so special, Ben? If I was trying to kind of take the template of being a man, being a leader, being a coach, what are three characteristics that I could take and start to implement in my own life, such that what I do as a coach, leader, anyone listening to this, and I think if you're in a leadership position, you're in a coaching position. Um,
yeah,
what characteristics does Coach Dungy have that we can actually relate to and start to practice in our own
yeah.
businesses, in our own lives?
Man, what a great question. The first the first principle that comes to mind in describing him is authenticity. Man, Brandon, it's such an overlooked yet absolutely essential quality in the human condition is authenticity, right? Um, and Tony Dungy is probably one of the most authentic people that I've ever been around, which means that he is who he says he is. He acts who he is. What you see is what you get. Um, and that authenticity is a powerful trust generator, um, because it becomes the example, to the rest of the team how to practice what you preach. And so, when you have somebody that follows through on everything that they say they believe in, you set the bar for what it looks like to be, you know, um, a man of integrity and character, through the power of authenticity. And so I think it's something for all of us as leaders to really strive towards. Um, not to be, not to be seen as hypocritical, which happens a lot in business, where leaders will espouse one thing with their language and then they'll go behave in an opposite manner. And when team members see that, um, they instantly lose trust. They instantly lose respect. And so I would say authenticity is one of his strongest values that really um, empowers the team to actually, believe in Tony and what he says, right? Because what he says is what he does, right? And who he is. And then this next one I think it's a really unique leadership strength and style of his. And I call it bold grace. Bold grace, right? So grace is defined as to act with kindness and clemency. Um, but to do it with boldness, it's a really powerful combination. So what Tony was able to do through bold grace was he was able to hold you accountable and he was able to confront you on areas of weakness or growth, but to do it with kindness and clemency. That's a that's a rare quality, right? It's a rare quality. And it happened to me personally. I had ended up getting a penalty at the end of a game, and it actually lost us the game. So losing the game was my fault. It was a horrible experience. I didn't sleep that night. I was like, oh man, this is going to be rough. I went in early the next morning to watch the film by myself to see if it was really a penalty. And as I come out of the film room early in the morning, Tony Dungy comes out of his office, and I'm like, oh man, here we go. And he comes walking down the hallway and he says, "Did you watch the film?" I said, "I watched the film. What do you think, coach?" And he says, "I think it was the right call." And then here's what he said to me, Brennan. He said, "Ben, this team meeting is going to be really hard for you because we're going to call you out in front of all of your teammates. We're going to highlight the mistake that you made because we have to get better. But while it's going to be tough for you, and while I'm going to hold you accountable to what your role is, I just want you to know I believe in you. I know you're going to make the improvements. So I want to prepare you for what's to come. And I want to tell you we have to get this fixed if you want to keep playing. But I believe that you will, and I'll do whatever I can to help you."
That is
It
so
was,
powerful.
it was the craziest thing because I remember walking away from that moment going, okay, he basically just told me I'm going to sit on the bench if I don't fix this and get better. But he did it in a way where I feel better about myself. It was like, it was like he empowered me as a human and at the same time confronted me and held me accountable to what I have to accomplish on the field. And because of that bold grace, I respected him all the more. I wanted to play harder for him all the more because he chose a way of developing somebody where you can still be bold, you can still be confrontational, you can still hold people accountable, but you can do it in a way that still supports the purpose and value and significance of the human. Do you know what I mean? So
Oh, you've
anyway,
described it beautifully. That's a wonderful example. Bold grace. I haven't heard that before, and you've just described that wonderfully. I don't think there's anything more powerful you can say to someone, whether it's a child, someone you're coaching, someone in the workplace, that, eyeballing somebody and saying, "I believe in you." That's so, so powerful. And it
oh man.
gives you license then to have the conversation about behavior or performance that isn't, above the line, and
Well, and you see it, often I hold myself accountable as a parent to take the things that I'm teaching people in business and apply them to how I parent my four daughters. And I'll tell you, when I fail, you can see the impact of that failure on the faces of my daughters immediately. If my daughters make a mistake, um, and I have to confront that mistake, and I do it through power and control, and um, and I do it out of frustration or disappointment, you can just see it on their faces, the defeat and the head drops and the shame and the guilt that they put on themselves. But if I pause and I remember what I'm teaching and I actually practice bold grace in my home. And I realize, okay, every opportunity is a growth opportunity. And so when if something didn't go well with a test or if they behaved in a way that hurt somebody else, if I pause and if I'm willing to approach that through the power of belief asking great questions, helping them realize what their true potential is, supporting them in that, and confronting the situation that needs to improve. It's like they walk out with a new sense of purpose, and their willingness to go back out into the world and to do better increases, and that's what we have to try to do as leaders.
Love that. So authenticity, bold grace. I'd asked you for three, and we could do a podcast on Coach Dungy itself, because I'm suspecting there's many more than three. But what would you say is one more?
I would say, you know, intentionality. Intentionality. Coach Dungy, um, 15 years after I've retired, will still answer every single text that I send him, right? He'll still pick up the phone. In those team every year when the new players would join the team, the very first thing one of the very first things he would do in that first team meeting is he'd say, I'm always here for every single one of you if you ever need me. And he would give everybody his personal cell phone number, right? And so there was an intentionality behind how important it was for him to build meaningful relationships that were sustainable. And that intentionality, I think, is very special in a coach. Sometimes I think coaches can kind of place themselves on a pedestal that separates them from their players. But Dungy um, had this belief and ability to still be in that position of authority, but to also be seen as just one man who cares about another. And that was really powerful.
Those are wonderful. I'm glad I pursed for the third one.
Yeah.
Just to pivot for a moment before we move into the close, this question is kind of anchored in the how are you doing now, because your concussion story is one of the most powerful parts of your journey. I mean, you lost your memories, you lost your career,
Mm.
you, and yet you describe it as something that ultimately give you clarity and purpose. How are you? How did you reframe this? And
Mm.
why do you feel your life is better now as a result of this career-ending
Yeah.
um, injury that you suffered?
Well, thank you for asking that. It was a tough way to leave the sport that you love to play. I had many documented concussions, and the last concussion in Cincinnati Bengals training camp that ended my career, um, you know, was was extremely difficult to go through. And um, we had just had our first daughter, and I was starting to notice some cognitive changes. And as you said, I dealt with because of some of the concussions that resulted in amnesia. I started, struggling with uh, short and long term, memory issues, and I was so thankful to find a brain training franchise actually called Learning RX that helped me retrain my brain through the power of neuroplasticity. And my wife would tell you she got her husband back. It was so cool because it focused on neuropsychological exercises that re-strengthened my memory capabilities, my executive functioning, and um, and that process was, just a wonderful healing process to go through. But I think one of I think why I can say um, that I'm better now for having gone through it was kind of this powerful realization of the role that suffering plays in our human development. And we talk about passion a lot in business, don't we? We use the word passion, but let's not forget the root of the word passion, which is Latin, which means suffering, right? And passion is connected to suffering because of what suffering is capable of teaching us about ourselves. And I'll never forget this story that Coach Dungy shared. One of his ministries with his wife is adoption. So they have a large family. They have like 12 children.
My word.
One of their young kids, Brendan, had a nerve disorder which didn't allow him to feel pain. And he shared this story with the team about the importance of suffering in development. And he said, "Men, my 3-year-old son, who has a nerve disorder that keeps him from feeling pain, walked into our kitchen, reached into the 350-degree oven, and pulled out a pan of chocolate chip cookies and started eating the cookies and had to be rushed to the hospital with third-degree burns on his hands and on his mouth." And he said, "Man, my son will never learn some of the most important lessons because he can't feel pain." Isn't that,
So powerful.
it's so powerful, right? So the lesson in that was that, when we face trials of many kinds, when we face suffering of many kinds, when we face pain, um, we have the opportunity to learn things about ourselves that enhance our ability to grow in wisdom. And wisdom is found at the intersection of knowledge and experience. And if we approach periods of suffering with the mindset that within this process is going to be truths and it's going to be fruit that can actually make us stronger and better as humans, then we won't fear it. And that's ultimately what really brought me through the concussion transition in my life was holding on to this truth that, okay, I could look at this career-ending injury, and I could let it control my life. I could let it define who I am, or I can sit back and wait for these powerful moments of self-discovery that otherwise wouldn't come unless I go through um, that type of a fire. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I'm keen to understand what was the story that you told yourself as you're navigating through that incredibly difficult time. Clearly, uh, you know, there's an inner voice there that will likely be quite devastating, quite destructive. But I suspect, and what I'm hearing is that your inner voice, the story that you were telling yourself, was not one that was destructive. It was one
No.
that was very constructive. What did that look like on a
Yeah.
daily basis? Was there a
So yeah,
practice? Was
there was a practice that came out of a verse that I heard from my dad a long time ago that says, "Blessed is the man that perseveres under trials of many kinds. For when you withstand the test, right, that's when you develop more purpose, and purpose develops character, and character develops talent." So I held on to this foundational belief that when you endure the testing is when you will inherit the greatest blessing, right? And that's really what it came down to. So I trusted in the process of enduring the testing so that I could receive the greatest blessing, right? And the greatest blessing for me, Brendan, was not more fame or more wealth or more success. It was being finding wholeness as a husband, and finding stronger purpose as a father, right? Because if I don't have my wife and my daughters, then none of it matters, right? It's all going to burn away every anyway, when I leave this earth. So none of it matters. So you kind of go through those periods, and you come to realize, what your purpose in life is really about. And for me, it's about serving my wife and about serving my family and serving the people that I come in contact with in hopes to improve their lives. That's legacy. And ultimately, that's what you want culture to be. When your culture and your organization, um, when your culture in your organization leaves people better than when they first came, you've just created a culture that has a legacy of transforming people. And man, that's a much bigger deal than profitability.
Here, here, and interestingly, it leads to higher performing companies and more profitable companies when we actually focus on the culture. And I've witnessed this time and time again. And 5 years into this podcast as well, I've heard so many stories. I think if you're not already connected to Bob Chapman,
Oh yeah.
from Barry Weimiller, I would encourage you guys to get together because the wisdom and the belief system that you both have is very, very aligned. You have so much wisdom, Ben, for such a young man.
Oh, thank
I've had goosebumps for the most part of this conversation. Can you share with our audience three timeless takeaways?
Three timeless takeaways would be a couple of things that that we already covered. Um, Number one is to understand that culture can't be a program; it has to be a movement. If you want to scale culture, it has to start through inspiring the power of belief. And remember, a movement is defined as a singular or community belief turned into action. If you want culture to scale, it has to be a movement. So, as leaders, do your best to inspire people to believe in the value principles that you've created. Secondly, you will always have a culture by design or default, right? Because culture comes out of human belief and human behavior. So, you're always going to have one. So, why not design it, right? Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I challenge that a little bit because he separates culture from strategy. And I believe culture has to be the strategy. And it should lead and guide every decision that you make in the organization, right? And thirdly, remember that culture is not a boulder game. Culture is a pebble game. And it's about creating simply profound practices that you can replicate to make an impact in the development of your people. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it, right? Start small and start with things that you can consistently practice and bring into the operational structure of the organization to develop your people towards the core beliefs and values of the company. And yeah, this is what I love, man. This is what I geek out about, right? And this is, I love coming into companies and helping them build uh, you know, this platform out in their business because they start to realize, wow, this is actually a muscle that's a lot easier to exercise than we've ever thought before. We just have to start doing it a little bit more consistently. And when you do, when you start making those simple adjustments over time, that's when the ripple effects start to play. That's when your retention goes up, right? That's when your individual performance goes up, right? Because you're slowly and consistently enhancing people's purpose, value, and significance in the organization. And the data is clear on that now. Culture is not the soft skills, people. You know, culture is the hardest product that we have, and you have to see it as a product, right? Because that's what differentiates you in the market, man.
Could not agree more. And clearly, your passion for culture and and deliberately creating high performing cultures that ultimately scale a purpose is evident. Ben,
Mhm.
I have absolutely loved this conversation. If people want to find out more about you, how best to connect with you?
Oh man, I'm super accessible on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, obviously, because it's a business community, so you can find me at Ben Utecht and please reach out. You can also go to benutechspeaks.com is a way that you can connect with me as well. I just finished a new speaker reel, which is it's just awesome. I worked with one of the top companies in the country here, and it just gives you a great embodiment of, what I do and what my speaking style is. And then obviously, Instagram and Facebook. I'm on all the platforms, but I'm very accessible because I really enjoy connecting with people and helping them in any way that I possibly can.
Brilliant, Ben. Well, look, tell me before we wrap up, what's next for you? So you've just released the book. It's a wonderful book, folks. Please go out and get a copy of this book. What else is on the horizon?
Um, well, speaking of scaling, Brendan, so what I've really felt the calling is over the last 6 months is to develop this whole strategy and culture operating system into a software platform. So I'm getting really close to launching my own omni culture platform that we call COS, right? So culture operating strategy. And so really excited to take everything that I have been teaching and turn it into a very scalable and very affordable foundation. We built this for SMB because oftentimes SMB gets overlooked when it comes to the types of resources that they have the ability to afford in their budgets. And so I want to create a simply profound culture transformation platform that is so affordable that they don't even think about it and they can just apply it and use it. So we're doing that. And then I've got four girls that are playing very competitive volleyball and we travel all around the country. So I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling and pouring into these girls, but then trying to scale culture to the best of my ability.
Well, I have to say, I wish you every success with your new venture, Ben. Your girls are very lucky to have you as a dad. You're a beautiful human. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation today. Thank you for getting up so early. I know you're an early
Yeah.
riser anyway. I love your energy. I love your experience. Your humility just shines through. Man, you're doing amazing work. So continue putting value out into the world, and more people need to know about Ben Utecht, and we're going to do our bit to help in spreading the word. So Ben,
Thanks.
I thanks so much. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you so much.